Gull, amidst the crackling fire under a mushroom umbrella, sat on a strange and soft mushroom cushion. He was patiently waiting for the perfect cooking of a small fish. Ran was sitting on the other side, enjoying his meal while his loyal chicken rested lazily next to him. In the middle of this delicious meal, Ran felt an unusual sensation in her mouth, a taste she had never encountered before. Despite this, he continued chewing and casually asked Gull something unrelated. The young orc eagerly swallowed the remaining contents of his shell. His excitement was palpable. Ran then asked about her companion's well-being. He thought the chicken might be hungry after the long journey, but he didn't know what to feed it. The sand chicken couldn't believe the man was worried about him. Gull replied nonchalantly that chickens normally eat corn or cereals, but they hadn't packed any of those in their provisions. Then a brilliant idea occurred to him. They should abandon the corn idea and instead fatten the chicken with whatever they have. Gull picked up the remaining pieces of meat from his meal and threw them to the bird. The chicken wasn't bothered by the motivation behind it. He liked meat like anyone else. As Ran witnessed this, the strange taste he was chewing made sense. He realized it was meat. Horrified, he dropped the shell, confused for the first time in his life. The noble elf had inadvertently tasted meat. He accused Gull of being a monster for making him eat the flesh of a poor animal. While he ran, vomiting and sobbing uncontrollably with guilt, Gull just looked at him with amusement, thinking he was being exaggerated. Meanwhile, Gull was cleaning his teeth with a toothpick and scratching himself roughly under his pants. After dinner, Ran calmed down, accepting that she had lost her carnal virginity. The pair laid down their mattresses, and Gull was soon snoring like a chainsaw. Ran was still quite upset and embarrassed about what had happened earlier. However, the chicken was there to comfort him, and he was grateful for its presence. Ran decided that from now on she would call this faithful bird Illuminata Ensenada, a majestic name for such a humble chicken. And so the night passed. Under the clear and bright sky, you could hear the sounds of chicken chirping early in the morning. Gull was going through his morning routine, urinating on a mushroom to give him some vitamins, while Ran was doing her morning stretches in preparation for the road ahead. Suddenly, they were surprised by a loud and intimidating sound coming from the right where Illuminata should have been. What they saw was truly surprising. The once plump chicken legs had turned into thick, sharp claws like a predator's. The chicken now looked like a rock star with an impressive crest. His body had undergone significant changes, becoming more formidable in every aspect. Illuminata Ensenada had experienced drastic and remarkable growth overnight. He managed to keep those innocent eyes and that somewhat cute face. The duo left after witnessing the evolution of that little chicken, which had followed them with all its strength until this point in the journey. Ran approached her chicken and praised Illuminata Ensenada for becoming something incredible in such a short time. Gull didn't know that Ran had given the bird an unpronounceable name. He thought Ran had terrible taste in both food and names, so he wouldn't recognize the ridiculous name. Gull, we will call the bird Lomi. That is what it will sound like, and it will look much more delicious, he declared. Enough of that. They needed to leave as they had a long way to go for this mission. Gull wanted to see if Lomi could keep up. However, the chicken was no ordinary chicken. He boldly lined up against Gull, preparing for a run. Ran found it strange that this boy wanted to compete with a bird. As soon as Gull gave the signal to start, the two competitors left as quickly as they could. Ran had no choice but to join in the madness. At this moment, Gull was leading by a small margin, with the dark elf and the chicken right behind him. However, the young orc was not going to let anyone steal his spotlight. He increased his speed and left the other two in the dust. This ridiculous rush continued until they finally reached one of the important parts of the expedition, the Deadly Mountain of Women. For Gull, this marked an important milestone. This point was the furthest he had ever been from the village, and from here, his true adventure would begin. He wasn't going to miss the opportunity to get some wyvern eggs while they were already here. Ran suggested that they urgently needed to head straight to the Elf Kingdom and had no time to waste. The young orc refused to listen to reason. As always, he just gave Ran enough of a look and told him to calm down. Gull was already thinking about having wyvern eggs for dinner that night. It was going to be a feast that only he would enjoy. Ran kept trying desperately to convince the boy to just eat some nutritious elf bread instead. He generously took one out of his bag, wrapped it carefully, and offered it to Gull. Instead of just eating the damned elf bread, the rebellious Gull pushed it away in pure disgust. He was determined to get some wyvern eggs. He almost escaped the dark elf's murderous tendencies, but he had his frustrations. They constantly reminded him that he was out of his league dealing with the young orc. The peak of the Wyvern Mountains is one of the highest in the region. The air currents near the top are extremely strong and dangerous. At this moment, the group consisting of an orc, an elf and a chicken were trying to climb the treacherous peak. They were fighting serious elements that threatened to blow them to their deaths. Every step they took could be their last, and every rock they leaned on was dangerous. Ran was being forced to do something he didn't want to do again. Atop the mountain, several adult wyverns patrolled the skies, protecting their nests from pesky invaders like Gull. Despite the fearsome threat from above, the young orc had his eyes on the prize. All Gull could see were those tempting and delicious eggs right in front of him. The wyverns that patrolled the skies did so with precision, looking for any threat to their precious eggs. Essentially, they protected their young from predators. The size of a single adult wyvern was gigantic, making our unlikely trio seem insignificant. As soon as the first patrol passed and the way was clear, Gull was eager to seize his opportunity. His overly cautious aunt always tasked him with fetching wyvern eggs for special occasions in the village or whenever the boss wanted his special ramen. For him now, it was like collecting an egg from the henhouse. Rand gave up her objections and simply asked the young orc to do what he had to do and be quick. They were wasting precious time needed for their mission. To do this, Gull needed to quickly grab the Gullman backpack and find a hiding place in the mountain with Lomi. He was eager to show off his skills. The first step in his foolproof method of stealing eggs was to find an inconspicuous bush and modify it a little. He had done this many times before and had become something of a master at turning a bush into specialized camouflage. Even a top-notch assassin would have to admit that Gull was unexpectedly skilled when it came to improvised disguises. The next step was to slowly crawl towards the nest under the watchful eyes of the patrolling wyverns. From above, it looked like just another bush, perfectly camouflaged. When the wyvern guard moved and looked at the eggs, Gull simply used his motionless camouflage technique masterfully, and it was extremely effective against the wyverns, which were not very intelligent. They continued their patrol without noticing anything strange or out of place. This orc did this from a young age and improved his camouflage skills to level 100. Deceiving these immense predators had become second nature to Gull, and he had become very proficient at it. In his eyes, although these wyverns were closer to dragons by blood, they were really just big stupid birds that couldn't realize when they were being robbed. He continued approaching the nest until the delicious eggs were within arm's reach. Ran and Lomi watched anxiously, hidden among the bushes, their hearts pounding as the young orc carried out his impressive egg robbery, until the silhouette of a falling body caught his attention. He landed right in front of the bush where Ran was hiding, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. What stood before him was the mutilated, lifeless body of a creature clad in combat armor, now tattered and ruined. Ran identified the body as the remains of a goblin, and goblins were not supposed to be found at this altitude. This event set off a warning sign in his mind. He started to hear something strange nearby. The dark elf jumped to the side and prepared to face the situation with utmost seriousness. After all, they were on a crucial mission. He moved to the edge of a cliff where the view was, to say the least, astonishing. There was a battalion of goblins, their expressions wild and frenzied, engaged in a fierce and unrestrained fight. Ran knew these were wyvern-hunting goblins, and they only brought trouble, especially now. He retreated quickly to avoid drawing unnecessary attention and to warn Gull that his wyvern egg side quest needed to end immediately. First, Ran needed to protect the golem and the backpack hidden in the foliage, and she needed to do it quickly. Then he turned his attention to Gull, intending to warn him that they needed to get out of there immediately, but there was no response. Panic set in when Ran realized that Gull was gone, and one of the wyvern eggs too. At this critical moment, stealth and stealth were no longer priorities. Ran screamed Gull's name as loud as she could. They needed to get out of there, and they needed to do it now. The wyvern patrolling the area finally noticed the commotion. He screamed in anger and surprise, a sound that sent shivers down Ran's spine. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The wyvern-hunting goblin army also realized that one of their targets had been severely agitated, potentially giving them the chance to kill him. Meanwhile, Gull was running like crazy down the mountain, still with Bosch's head and carrying an egg as big as his own body. A monstrous wyvern was focused on him, descending from the sky at terrifying speeds. The beast ignored the other intruders, focusing only on Gull, the thief who had essentially kidnapped one of its babies. Ran couldn't take it anymore. The young orc brought nothing but trouble and chaos to his high-risk mission, and it was becoming unbearable. As Ran watched, some of the goblins were brutally slaughtered, while their comrades smiled maniacally and charged forward, eager for a chance to kill. A goblin, armed with bone daggers, rushed towards Gull, focusing on him. The other advancing goblins were easily killed and swept aside by the monstrous wyvern they were trying to hunt. It seemed like the goblin with the bone daggers was about to meet the same fate as its predecessors when the wyvern's tail lashed out like a huge whip. The resulting strike from the wyvern's tail produced a sonic boom and a thunderous crack, nearly demolishing the cliff wall in front of the crazed goblins. The wyvern was tiring of the goblins' relentless and suicidal attacks. He decided to face the little pests head-on. With a single sweep of its scaly tail, several goblins were injured or killed. Those who survived would likely be out of action for the remainder of the hunt. Another wyvern, patrolling the area, came down to survey the chaos. It conjured whirlwinds that trapped and crushed the goblins with high pressure, cutting air. But not all goblins were battle-hungry fools. Some had a keen eye for strategy, like what directed the others. Rand noticed this goblin chief Kai, as the others called him now on the front lines, sending the untrained goblins into combat. They underestimated the intelligence of these draconic beasts. The wyverns kept a good distance and used their range to their advantage, showing a surprising level of tactical awareness. Unless they reach the ground, the goblins will never be able to land a killing blow on the wyverns. That may be true, but Chief Kine is not one to back down from a challenge. He is determined to ensure that his goblin army does not leave empty-handed today, no matter the cost. Rand hurriedly ran to their coop to inform him that they needed to leave urgently since Gull had advanced without them. He rushed with the supplies even though that was supposed to be Gull's job. The bird sat on top of his head, treating him like a pack horse. He couldn't help but feel that his so-called companions were nothing but burdens. Another thing he didn't consider was that the backpack Gull effortlessly carried was too heavy for a normal person. As Rand struggled with the backpack, we turned our attention to the steep river and mountain slopes. On one of the steepest cliffs stood Gull, in his patented Bosch suit, holding a wyvern egg and sliding wildly down. Gravity was working double time on his body. He slid and slid, creating a trail of dust as he descended. He had no choice but to take this extremely dangerous and foolish route because, just a few meters behind him, a gigantic, enraged flying wyvern was ready to finish him off with a single blow. Gull was sliding for his life, with certain death in the form of draconic claws above him and the cold, hard ground waiting below. The young orc wasn't the only one fighting the wyverns. The goblin hunting troop was also forced to retreat and regroup due to their heavy losses. Chief Kine's direct subordinates coordinated the retreat to an empty cave, leaving a funny-looking goblin named Capone as lookout. Before the goblins could settle down, Gull arrived on the scene, sliding backwards at high speed while holding a precious wyvern egg. Capone saw the commotion and turned around in time to see the wyvern descending the mountain, chasing the egg thief. He immediately informed the other goblins that a wyvern was descending at low altitude. This was the opportunity the battalion had been waiting for. Chief Kine and his direct subordinates were trying to regain their strength, but this news was too important to ignore. Despite his devastating losses, his thirst for wyvern blood remained. Chief Kine ordered everyone under his command to prepare for the hunt. All the wyvern hunting goblins that could still move didn't waste a second. They used the quickest route down the mountain, which was the steep slope. They only needed to achieve one goal: exterminate the wyvern. Doing so would allow them to evolve into hobgoblins. Now was the best time to make that dream come true. It seemed like something was distracting the wyvern from below, but they couldn't see what or who it was. However, this was the golden opportunity to attack. After a few tense moments, the wyvern finally managed to reach the clumsy and painfully sliding Gull. With a mighty swing of one of its wings, the wyvern launched the poor young orc off the sloped surface and straight into another painful collision with the ground. In this series, it appears that Gull has a tendency to fall from high places. Despite the impact, the injury or pain he felt from the fall was no big deal to his robust body. The biggest loss was the destruction of the wyvern egg, which absorbed all the impact of the collision with the rocks. Gull was now completely covered in wyvern egg yolk, shell, and slime. He lay there, passed out, his body dyed pale yellow. While still holding his precious egg, the leader of the goblin band, Chief Kine, was quick to relay orders to surround the wyvern and suffocate it from all angles. Encaran, the quick elf, and Ronson, the intelligent goblin, were two of the most reliable members of the band, known for their speed and efficiency in carrying out their boss's orders. Lethal Soprano, the goblin, and Creek, the green goblin, represented the wilder, crazier side of the spectrum. Meanwhile, Capone, the idiot goblin, was the one who had fallen and tripped earlier. Seeing the wyvern slow its descent, it was time for the band to launch its attack and take advantage of its numerical superiority. Like a true leader, Kine was the first to jump from the mountain's surface, raising his sword against the mighty wyvern. But his sword was no ordinary weapon. It was far from that. Designed to give the draconic beast a taste of humiliation and pain, the blade was intoxicated with a special mixture to add points of damage and humiliation. The creature's hard scales were no match for the force Kine delivered from above. It was a clean stab, very close to the hard spine, further amplifying the damage. Chief Kine stabbed the wyvern with such force that it created a massive and quite deep wound on one of its wings. The huge bird, so focused on punishing Gull the egg thief, failed to notice the looming threat from above. He screamed in surprise and pain after being cut by the goblin leader. The wyvern lost control of its body for a moment and fell, losing its flying advantage. This was the goblin's goal from the beginning, to bring the monster to their level, the ground level. Chief Kine managed to use the beast's own momentum against it, giving the goblins a fighting chance. Encaran was in charge of blocking the wyvern's path from all angles. They couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip away. The wyvern should not run away at any cost. Considering that Enkaran was the fastest of the group, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to quickly block any escape route. As expected of the most agile, he positioned himself optimally in record time. Pleased with himself, he was prepared to defend the escape route with his trusty sword. However, now that he was the only one close to the wyvern, the size and scale of the monster were overwhelming. Terrified, he called out to Chief Kine, his voice shaking with fear. The sight before him was more than he could bear, and he feared for his life as the enormous wyvern turned all of its attention to him. The wyvern, despite having its wings cut off, didn't even try to escape. There was no longer a need to secure escape routes. The terrified beast intended to strike back, and from the ominous look of its deep draconic eyes, it seemed ready to fight to the end. It would certainly be a fight to the death. Chief Kine could see and feel this intensity. He was furious. Having come so close to hunting such powerful prey, he ordered Megan to stop defending the path. The goblin's main directive now was to immobilize the wyvern by any means necessary. Megan's initial strike was accurate, leaving a nasty gash on one of the wyvern's feet. It was an admirable attack considering the size disparity. Megan had done her job wonderfully. Opening the battle, he shouted for everyone to attack simultaneously. The poor wyvern had barely registered the pain in his leg when he realized that a gang of crazed goblins were about to descend upon him in full force. He turned his massive body to face the goblins, but the small creatures were relentless. They were not looking to retreat or defend themselves. They just wanted to inflict pain. The wyvern's first instinct was to use its powerful tail to sweep away the approaching battalion. This was a formidable attack, often effective against enemies that relied on numbers. He even conjured crushing whirlwinds of air, but the goblins gained momentum, leaping high into the air and using each other as platforms. A goblin who had lost an eye fighting the wyverns at the top now brandished her spear, aiming directly at a specific target. His intention was an eye for an eye. She approached from the side where Chief Kine had injured one of his wings. The wyvern, despite its injuries, managed to create a sharp whirlwind to defend itself from direct attacks. However, even with several whirlwinds around, the goblin girl quickly thought of throwing her spear, shouting out a made-up technique called Plant Nation Throw. It was a success, brutally gouging out one of the wyvern's eyes as blood gushed from the vulnerable spot. The creature screamed in pain again. Encouraged by the goblin girl's success, another goblin named Krieg, a dwarf, wanted to replicate the feat, this time using Capone as an aerial boost. Capone, inspired by the NASA Planta launch, tried to shout a technique on the spot. However, with Capone's limited mental capacity, he naturally botched the simple task of helping a fellow warrior. This wasted another opportunity to inflict damage, resulting in both dwarves falling to the ground. This is what happens when you try to show off. Krieg was furious, hitting the idiots in frustration and pushing them down instead of up. While all this commotion was happening at the foot of the mountain, Gull had just woken up from the blow that left him unconscious for a minute. He was not seriously injured, but was devastated by the loss of his egg. The now broken egg was the one he had come for, and he had to say goodbye to the feast he eagerly awaited. What followed the surprise and devastation was unbridled fury. The young orc was so furious that his skin turned bright red, and smoke began to come out of his nostrils. Then, something bizarre happened again. Reminiscent of his battle with the village demon, one of his feet began to glow a fiery red as he prepared to kick a nearby rock in his rage, cursing the wyvern that had chased him. The frustration and anger he felt over losing the precious egg had awakened a terrifying energy within him. This energy was concentrated in his foot, channeling all his fury into a simple stone that was nearby. It was a simple kick, an act of annoyance because they ruined his dinner, but the rock flew with such incredible force and speed that it pierced the unfortunate wyvern's scales, neck, flesh, organ, and bones, finally passing through with immense momentum. Meanwhile, the battle continued at the foot of the mountain. The wyvern-hunting goblins faced a colossal beast capable of conjuring deadly whirlwinds. Chief Kai was preparing to enter the fray to deliver the final blow. As he and another strong goblin were the only ones capable of delivering a fatal blow, the two formidable goblins jumped as high as they could with perfect coordination and synchronization. They seemed to have found the perfect formula to face larger monsters, using each other's bodies as momentum for more powerful attacks. This time, they executed the so-called Booster Magatron, with Chief Kai as the main attacker, brandishing his toxic sword, covered in urine. The wyvern was bleeding profusely from several serious wounds, running out of energy to defend itself against the aggressive Chief Kai. Just when Chief Kai was about to deliver the fatal blow, Gull was on the ground, cursing the wyvern and the heavens for ruining his dinner. In his fury, he manifested an otherworldly power in his foot. Finally, her foot made contact with the ordinary rock, launching her at supersonic speeds like a bullet. Gull had no idea that an entire war was being fought while he was unconscious. The rock pierced the wyvern's neck just before Chief Kai unleashed his final attack. This unexpected slaughter demonstrated the formidable strength of the goblin races. Chief Kai landed like a superhero, his cape fluttering dramatically, a grim expression on his face as the wyvern's gigantic gigantic body fell heavily behind him. With this unexpected victory, he proclaimed himself the elf champion. Although Chief Kai was too focused on his own attack to notice, a goblin saw something strange. Just before the final blow, he saw what appeared to be a meteorite hitting the wyvern, but these worries were drowned out by everyone else's celebrations. The rest of the band celebrated Chief Kai's victory, certain that their leader was about to become a hobgoblin. They were proud of their smart and cunning boss. Kai, in a very good mood after the great victory, approached his people and thanked them, saying that this would not have been possible without their help. So naturally, we had to celebrate the victory. The tension eased, and one of the goblins stumbled upon Gull, mistaking him for another goblin who had served as bait to lure the wyvern to the ground. Gull felt more insulted at being called bait than at being mistaken for a goblin. Covered in wyvern egg yolk, he actually looked a bit like a deformed goblin. Gull was well liked and got along well with everyone. Then he greeted them casually. "What's up?" It may have seemed funny, but the other goblins were genuinely impressed. Even Chief Kai thanked him for making the entire hunt possible. Gull felt proud to be able to say that he had been dealing with wyverns for 12 years. He savored all the praise and reveled in the shared victory. When asked his name, he proudly announced that he was Gull. In the ancient fairy language, Gull meant goblin. This led to a confusing conversation between Chief Kai and him, ending with the conclusion that Gull was indeed stupid. However, this was no problem for anyone. Chief Kai even gave Gull a new nickname, Mars the Orc, to celebrate. The goblins performed Subtown Punk, an interpretation of a very popular human song. They sang and danced without a care, and Gull found himself joining the goblins on their journey to take the wyvern's corpse back home. For now, let's shift our focus to a peaceful human-inhabited farming village called Lithos Village. This village was lush in greenery, and crops flourished abundantly. A beautiful woman named Rieka walked through the village, holding a basket. For her, a morning as beautiful as this promised a wonderful day. Rieka was extremely sociable, the type of person who knew everyone and was known by everyone. She headed to the local bakery to buy some fresh bread. She was a regular customer, and even the curly-haired baker knew her usual order. When they asked where she was going next, she mentioned that she would stop by the spice store. His father had gone hunting for meat, so it was the perfect day to stock up on spices. As Rieka happily walked through the village, enjoying the views and greeting the villagers, she noticed something strange happening along the way. A group of men were playing a board game, and it seemed like the old man was continually losing to his boisterous red-haired opponent. Rieka's calm and peaceful smile quickly turned into a determined one upon seeing this commotion. The next moment, she took over the game, moving the pieces precisely with her delicate hand. Rieka had paused her seasoning shopping to play a few rounds, and on that board, she exuded a different aura. She wasn't just the girl next door, she was a formidable opponent. After decisively winning the game, she regained her calm demeanor, but was sharp when talking about her opponent's lack of sportsmanship. These poor guys were nothing to her when it came to the board game. Spectators watching the match seemed to be tired of seeing how easily she intimidated her opponents. The old man who was losing before thought that Rieka was really special. After a few easy games, Rieka won decisively. The crowd felt a mixture of admiration and frustration at his skill. Feeling quite pleased with herself, Rieka decided it was time to continue her tasks. She believed that her favorite red chili, which had just arrived at the store, was the secret to making her meat dishes exceptionally delicious. However, the store had a policy that she couldn't taste the chili until she bought the first 3 bags. Determined, Rieka continued to complete her shopping, oblivious to the imminent danger. On the horizon of the peaceful little town, trouble was brewing. Sinister figures were heading towards the picturesque place. Clearly harboring malicious intentions, they moved quickly, armed with sinister weapons, and appeared to be an organized force ready for an attack. These silhouettes exuded an aura of impending doom. As they approached, the daylight revealed them to be a band of goblins, each with pale yellow skin and blue hair, more grotesque than the last. They moved in spearhead formation, led by a goblin with a sense of style, positioned at the front. Flanking him were his direct officers, and the rest followed in unison. It was evident that the elf goblin with the letter M carved into his forehead and an owl mascot perched on his shoulder was the leader of this operation. This evil goblin gave a chilling order to his subordinates. No goblin would stop until they had captured every pristine girl in this quaint little town. The evil aura of these goblins descended upon the village like a brutal, nauseating plague. The invasion began on the east side of the city, while the spice store where Rieka shopped was on the opposite side. Rieka had just finished her daily shopping, looking forward to a beautiful and ordinary day. But when the sky darkened with the presence of countless goblins invading the village, it became clear that this day was far from ordinary. Rieka turned to see what was causing the commotion behind her. She froze in place, unable to comprehend the chaos unfolding before her eyes. The peaceful atmosphere of the city had turned bloody and dark. The beautiful resident didn't even have time to process what was happening when an evil elf, brandishing an elk as a weapon, grabbed her by the face. Her shopping basket and all its contents fell to the floor as she was forcibly taken away. What followed was a horde of monsters with wild, greedy eyes invading every corner of the village in search of their next victim. They were the kind of creatures you see in your worst nightmares, operating under a twisted system of morality vastly different from our own. Meanwhile, back at Wyvern Mountain, an all too familiar rope tied to a weighted stone was being lowered from one of the cliff sides. It was Ran. He was making his daring escape together with Nomi and the heavy backpack, skillfully using the rope as a makeshift toboggan. He couldn't believe Gull had brought and carried such a heavy backpack on a mission that was supposed to be quick. Improvising a reliable rope for the descent had not been an easy task. Lomi, who had been skeptical about going after the egg in the first place, now saw his escape from the wyvern's deadly nest as a loud but necessary victory. Back on solid ground, Ran hoped to find Gull at the foot of the mountains, but it seemed that nothing would be easy for the young orc. All he saw was the aftermath of the bloody wyvern hunt. He felt helpless in his position. I could only scream Gull's name into the wind in frustration. Fortunately, he had his companion Lomi shouting at his side. Let's skip a moment to a foreign and distant land. Although a distant sea would be more appropriate, a ship with a very specific design was crossing the dark waters. There was a figure known as Rapid Boat, in charge of the chaotic scene. Recognizable by his distinctive appearance, he was the mysterious platinum-rank human adventurer who had rescued the demon's eyes. He tended to the vice captain's injuries, wrapping him up like a mummy, and now he seemed to be heading to a place that was extremely difficult to reach. A few days had passed since the rescue, and it was the first time that the vice captain had opened his eyes with a terrified scream. Spade noticed the demon finally waking up. The vice captain, despite having suffered such serious injuries, was still breathing. Spade could only wonder what kind of beast could inflict such damage. The vice captain tried to speak, trying to understand where he was and who he was talking to, but Spade advised the evil Arundano not to speak. Given that his face was literally broken, they told him to be quiet. Spade was heading towards where Izol could find refuge. This was a colorful port city called Tapu, the district of lazy demons. Despite their reputation, they had built a beautiful city for themselves. Spade disembarked from his speedboat and entered the docks as if he were entering a normal city. He asked the sailors at the port for help while transporting the vice captain's bloodied and bruised body. One would think that a city full of lazy demons wouldn't welcome a human intruder, but Spade couldn't be more wrong. At Tapu, he was treated favorably, almost as if he were one of the locals. It seemed that Spade had deep connections with the demon race. He unceremoniously dumped Izol's mangled body in the dockworkers' loading bay after picking up the vice captain from the forest. The workers immediately recognized Vice Captain Izol, even in his weakened state. He still had the iconic, ugly smile that any demon would recognize. Spade left him in the care of the workers, stating that he had business with someone named Enro downtown. Lazy workers used large creatures that resembled a hybrid of a bear and a cow to move and transport objects from the port. True to their nature as demons of laziness, the workers were perpetually tired, grumbling and impatient. Spade was hard at work, having crossed a long bridge to reach his destination. Finally, they arrived at the top of the harbor, which was right next to the Army of Greed's base camp. Guarding the entrance on this side was an armed soldier named Jumbo, one of the workers' acquaintances. Jumbo looked at what Spade was carrying and was shocked to see his prestigious vice captain in such bad shape. He immediately transported the seriously injured vice captain to the district of Avarice, a place that shared many stylistic similarities with the district of Sloth, but placed more emphasis on extravagance and wealth. Jumbo, almost out of breath, ran through the city as fast as he could to take the vice captain to someone named Captain Hack. Captain Hack Yugo, leader of the Army of Avarice, was talking near the chimney of Avarice with Captain Shuya Aun of the Army of Envy. It was difficult for Vice Captain Izol to remain upright on his knees. When Captain Hack Yugo directly asked about the whereabouts of the artifact, the Vice Captain's smile disappeared, a rare event for him. Unable to look the captain in the eye, Izol confessed that he did not have the artifact. These words immediately provoked the captain's fury. He hoped that his right hand would deliver the artifact without any problems. Instead, Izol had returned half dead and empty-handed. Attempts to explain that they were ambushed by orcs in a small, isolated village did not calm Hack Yugo. In fact, it only made him angrier. Simple orcs shouldn't pose a problem for a proud demon like him. It was shameful to be defeated by an inferior group. Captain Hack Yugo began to emanate a golden light, preparing to end Izol's life in a fit of rage. But Izol quickly added that these were no ordinary orcs, they almost killed him for a reason. The captain, tired of Izol's excuses, prepared to attack with a golden glove that resembled an infinite gauntlet. Izol then intervened, saying that they were defeated due to the appearance of a legendary beast master. This revelation caught the attention of Captain Shuya-aun of the Army of Envy. The old captain leaned forward with apparent interest, easily deflecting Hak Yugo's enormous golden fist with his discreet scepter. Captain Shuya-aun wanted to know more about this so-called beast master. Izol explained that the orc was incredibly strong, one of the most formidable enemies he had ever faced. This piqued Shuya-aun's curiosity even further, almost to the point of obsession. Izol elaborated that the monster possessed a powerful ability called Beast Fury Spirit. Upon hearing this, Captain Shuya-aun became even more intrigued. He wanted to have a private conversation with the now visibly impatient and confused Captain Hak Yugo. The old demon whispered very curious things in Hak Yugo's ear, and it seemed that the Captain of Avarice found the ideas whispered to him very interesting. Captain Shuya-aun of Envy had a straightforward plan. Instead of killing the vice captain, he decided to use him for a demonstration. Without wasting a second, the old demon conjured a sinister aura that enveloped his hand. The vice captain of Avarice, already injured, had no escape. He became an easy target for Captain Shuya-aun's Numa extraction. Agonizing screams echoed through the corridors of base camp that night, a chilling testament to the vice captain's torment. Now that we've seen the chaos on the demon side, let's shift our focus to the human situation. In a modest building adorned with job advertisements and a red flag inscribed with a badge, the non-commissioned officers gathered for a meeting. Inside, a man with a mask and a mechanical touch almost more machine than human was receiving reports of Spade's actions in the trees and forest. The leader of the Red Silver Range group summarized the events. After the imprisoned heart disappeared, they attempted to track Spade down, but he left no trace, as expected of someone as skilled as him. Spade, after all, is one of the most experienced members of the guild. He can remain undetected if he chooses. For now, the group needed to ensure this information didn't leak. If Spade ever returned, even the stoic guildmaster Francis Eigerforsberg would have to speak to him personally, having no idea what the mysterious Spade was up to. After the report, the Red Silver Range group hoped to walk away from the conversation with the intense guildmaster, thinking they were free. They seemed to have a close relationship with their leader, but just as they were about to leave, Franz ordered them to stay. This was the last thing they wanted to hear. The guild leader had not forgotten the real reason they were sent to Trent Forest. They were to hand over the Branch of Rage to complete a quest, a topic they had skillfully avoided. Red tried to downplay the problem, explaining that they had forgotten the branch in the chaos. The leader argued that finding a demon in the forest was significant. Furthermore, Spade, who saved them, was possibly a traitor, which added to the shock. The four members of the group shared this feeling. Red even begged Franz not to send them back to that place. He brought his secret weapon, the phrase "Amelie," repeated twice, a joke the four of them had rehearsed to diffuse tense situations. In response, the guild leader's patience ran out. Veins began to stand out under his mask as he became irritated. Finally, they were thrown into the adventurer training camp. At this moment, two adventurers were fighting in the sand. One used a magical claw technique, while the other wielded a traditional katana. Red and his deputy leader were blaming the gentle giant Scar for forgetting the object of the quest, when in fact it was their responsibility to carry the branch, not Scar's. Although they are decent in combat, they often act like imbeciles, and their current task was similar to taking care of children. It was time for them to step up and do their jobs. A group of adventurers in training approached Red, apologizing that one of their members appeared to have gone missing. Red welcomed the apprentices warmly, completely ignoring the issue of the missing rookie. He believed that if the boy was destined to be there, he would eventually return, so he decided to move on to one of the most interesting parts of babysitting duties. It was time to start testing. In these tests, the format was classic one-on-one combat in the main arena of the adventurers training camp. In one corner, the crowd favorite was an adventurous apprentice named Cross, whose weapons of choice were a classic sword and shield. In the other corner was another apprentice, Suzaku, wielding his long-handled cleaver. Red allowed the two to fight with all their might, confident that nothing could go wrong since they were just beginners. He was sure he could intervene if anyone got into serious trouble. Plus, it would provide some entertainment before they went goblin hunting the next day. The guildmaster was notorious for overloading the party with multiple quests, testing their skills to the limit. The guildmaster's need to exploit the group's abilities had led to a backlog of tasks. The group should investigate the reasons for the increased presence of goblin groups. With human crusaders along, they prepared for a counterattack which Suzaku deftly avoided. Red wasn't entirely sure of the goblins' motivations, but he had a hunch. The training arena was buzzing with excitement as the fight between Cross and Suzaku heated up. Despite being apprentices, the fighting was at a higher level than expected. The dust from the intense collision settled, revealing the fierce battle between them. Suzaku's strange demonic appearance became evident, amusing rather than alarming viewers. After the transformation, Suzaku's training skills seemed to have advanced to a higher level. He wielded his long-handled blade like a hurricane, forcing Cross to desperately block with his sword and shield under the relentless attack. Red, who was overseeing the fight, began to feel that things might be getting out of control. Suzaku's ugly face contorted into a strange smile as he found a gap in Cross's persistent defense. Suzaku leapt up like a meteor with his sword firmly planted in the ground, and the impact of the attack sent Cross flying. Although it wasn't a direct hit, Cross managed to regain his balance, grabbing his sword and shield. Determined not to be overpowered and forced into a defensive posture throughout the fight, he braced himself. The two apprentices collided in a series of intense exchanges, each blow being met with an equally powerful counterattack. They seemed completely consumed by the combat, which no longer resembled friendly training. Instead, it began to feel like a duel to the death. Red panicked as he watched the increasing violence and desperately ordered the apprentices to stop the fight immediately. However, both fighters were now locked in their own world. Cross screamed as if he was on a battlefield, while Soku laughed maniacally, looking like a mischievous demon. The next exchange of terrifying attacks produced an explosion that destroyed the center of the arena and shattered the mediation platform. Red realized he was not equipped to handle the situation. This fight had escalated far beyond the normal level of beginners. Red considered calling some gold rank adventurers from the tavern to intervene quickly. The Adventurers Guild and training camp were located in a small human town called Camouflaged. Today, residents witnessed an explosion inside the training ground, causing panic among customers. Inside, seats that should have been full of spectators were now empty, and much of the area was destroyed. A huge crater marked the spot where the final exchange had taken place. Medical personnel were called, and Sako had to be taken out on a wooden stretcher. The boy was in bad shape after the intense battle. A tall man in an elegant leather coat named Nomiya, a gold rank adventurer from the same guild, was also summoned to the scene and wanted to speak to Red. Nomiya, a gold rank adventurer, was supposed to oversee the tasks of today's apprentices, and now Red had a lot to explain about the incident. The group's leader and main enforcer took the other apprentice responsible for the destruction to meet with Nomiya. They both gulped as Nomiya began her interrogation. As usual, Red adopted his laid-back demeanor to minimize the severity of the situation. He started by praising Nomiya, calling him brother, and thanking the gold rank adventurer for arriving at the right time. Red continued to praise Nomiya, emphasizing that he was the only reliable gold rank adventurer in the area and expressing his gratitude once again. However, Nomiya was not swayed by the praise. He was furious that Red was unable to control the apprentices and prevent their destruction. Now, an apprentice was injured, and the training ground was in urgent need of repairs. Nomiya turned to the boy, who was on the verge of tears, and admitted that although the new boy had talent, his lack of control was a significant problem that needed to be resolved. Nomiya acknowledged that Cross's negligence was partly responsible for today's incident. If Nomiya hadn't arrived in time to intervene, things could have been much worse. The battle had reached a critical point where the two apprentices were about to unleash their most powerful attacks. Nomiya was compelled to draw his weapon, a revolver that seemed out of place in this era. The shot echoed loudly, and with her impeccable aim, Nomiya managed to intercept Cross's sword before it could hit Suzaku's body. If Nomiya hadn't intervened, Suzaku might have killed his training partner. Although the worst-case scenario was avoided, the explosion caused by the powerful clash destroyed a significant portion of the training ground. Immediately, Cross pointed an accusing finger at Red, claiming that he was the one who gave permission to fight with everything. In Red's defense, he never anticipated these rookies would fight so fiercely. However, he genuinely apologized for his error in judgment. Fortunately, Nomiya was a reasonable man. While there, the gold rank adventurer informed Red that the mission had been brought forward, and he needed to prepare his party for a goblin raid that very night. The surrounding villagers were increasingly anxious, making the mission urgent. Nomiya himself would accompany them. This news was a huge inconvenience to Red. They had just returned from a failed mission and were now being sent out again. Nomiya had no time for further discussion. He would supervise the group that night. Red hadn't even showered when he was called to this urgent job. He could only curse Guildmaster France for treating him and his group like pawns, always moving from one mission to another. Since the mission was going to happen anyway, Red decided to take the rookie, Cross, to learn on the job. Despite his reckless fighting style and poor use of his shield, Cross had undeniable firepower. As night fell and the bright moon took its place, Rand found himself running alone. He couldn't understand why his backpack of supplies was so heavy. Lomi, on the other hand, was happy just to be there. At least they knew Gull was still alive, judging by the fresh footprints on the ground. However, they needed weapons after losing all their daggers. Rand was confident that he could handle the goblins, but their numbers should not be underestimated. His ropes required a man to use them effectively, and he didn't want to waste them before rescuing Gull from wherever he was. For now, all he and Lomi could do was continue following following the goblin gang's trail. The journey ahead was long, and the heavy Helgumen backpack didn't make things any easier. On the way, Lomi spotted a colorful worm squirming on the dirt road. The chicken immediately pounced on the potential meal, but collided with an owl that had the same idea. Instantly, a rivalry formed between the two birds. It was survival of the fittest, and both were determined to claim the worm. The owl, equally determined, faced Lomi. Despite being bitter rivals, they were willing to fight tooth and nail, or rather, beaks and claws for the tiny worm. The competition quickly turned into a no-holds-barred brawl. The birds, engaged in a fierce fight, fought like wild dogs. They started with an even exchange of blows, but Lomi soon realized the need to create some distance. Ran, upon turning around, saw her chicken performing an impressive anime-style slide, mirrored by the owl. It seemed that the owl group had also noticed the conflict. There were many goblins. Its evil purple eyes and glowing horns stood out in the dark. If you thought that the owl's owner was the goblin leader who brutally invaded a human city not long ago, you would be right. The crazy elf with an M-shaped scar on his face was known as Hades, an elf shaman. His owl was named Perry. Why Perry? Because he is simply perfect quintanilla and sees the dark elf's chickens as pests. He was going to Renwa in Okorio and was worried about Lomi, but Illuminata Ensenada just greeted his master, assuring him that he was fine. Rand finally realized that they had just come across another group of goblins. The shaman, Goblin Hades, was quite communicative. He even greeted the dark elf politely with a good evening. Rand didn't hesitate to drop his heavy backpack and prepare for an all-out war. Although it cost a ton of mana to use it, he took out his magic rope in preparation for battle. Hades, however, ignored the situation and told the dark elf to calm down, explaining that he had also had a very long day. He had to supervise his battalion of idiots to make sure they did their atrocious jobs well. Therefore, Hades was in no mood for a pointless fight with a dark elf assassin. Rand was not impressed. He didn't care how difficult the goblins' day had been. They should panic, or he would make them. It seemed like Hades had no problem with this, but he pointed out that the real fight was between his pets over who would eat first. He proposed that they let the two birds work it out themselves. Rand, remaining reasonable, agreed to the proposal. Hades smirked, confident that his owl would end the fight quickly. The dark elf prepared his chicken like a Pokemon, ready to show what it was capable of. Lomi landed perfectly on his two chicken legs, making a sound like coca-doddle-do to cheer himself up. Hades enjoyed the competition and found it spicy, so he sent perfect quintanilla onto the battlefield. Perry had a fierce look in his eyes, ready to give it his all with a fierce or what. The goblin shaman was firm in his belief that Lomi would not stand a chance against his owl. Rand believed otherwise. They could only watch and see what Lomi was capable of. Hades stood in one corner, while Rand took his place in the other. This was the battle of their lives. To begin with, Rand ordered Lomi to use a feather punch. The chicken adopted the posture of a runner about to explode forward, and that's exactly what it did, folding its feathers to one side to reach maximum speed. Lomi's eyes were fixed on his nocturnal opponent as he entered the punching zone. Lomi formed a ball with his feathers, looking like a fist. The feathered fist landed right on the owl's face. It was a clean blow, coming down with such force and intensity that it even scratched the ground beneath Perry. However, Hades believed it was not over. He was confident that Perry wouldn't be knocked out so easily with a single blow, and he was right. Perry stood his ground, absorbing the punch like it was nothing. Seeing this, Rand immediately shouted at Lomi to get out of the danger zone, but it might have been too late. Lomi was now flapping his wings frantically, struggling to regain control in the air. His punch had landed squarely, but it seemed to have little to no effect. In response, Perry unleashed small vortices of air using the dreaded wind bomb. Lomi tried to dodge the hurricane-like wind towers as fast as a clumsy, overweight chicken could. Unfortunately, his efforts weren't enough, and a mini whirlwind hit him directly. The vortex lifted Lomi high into the sky before exploding in a gust of wind at its peak. A deafening noise echoed through the air as Lomi, the precious Illuminata Ensenada, suffered a critical blow. Despite the damage, Lomi had the heart of a fighter. Even if he was just a chicken, he fought the pain and struggled to get up again. Even Hades and his goblins were surprised to see the bird still standing after that windstorm. If Lomi still wanted to fight, Rand would be there to support and guide him. The next attack in his arsenal would be the feather twist. Lomi took advantage of one of his strengths, his speed, which could match the pace of the fastest orc and a dark elf assassin. This time, he aimed to not just hit, but deliver a devastating blow. He adopted a martial arts pose, suspended in the air, preparing his next attack. He raised one of his wings, and several feathers began to rotate around him. This attack was not just a simple feather shot. Lomi was controlling the air around his opponent with the spinning feathers. Hades watched this with concern for his perfecto quintanilla. He realized that the annoying chicken was trying to wear Perry down, and it was working. However, the feather twist wouldn't last forever. Perry managed to free himself from the vortex after a few moments, but that was when he fell into Rand's trap. He immediately ordered Lomi to perform the explosive beak royal attack. The chicken raised its head and prepared the most powerful technique it could muster. It was a long-range crosscut that used the energy of its sharp beaks like a laser. The beak explosion traveled at incredible speed. But that wasn't all. Lomi followed the speed of the explosion, running alongside the attack itself. In addition to the destructive power of the laser-like attack, there was also the imminent physical offensive. Perry, exhausted from dealing with the feather twister, was completely exposed to the final attack. He knew that this was not just a simple feather punch that he could easily resist. This was real. A huge explosion lit up the dark, damp path under the moonlight. However, it seemed that even Lomi's strongest attack was not enough. Perry the Owl was very strong and had more experience. He had just discovered the weakness in the technique. With a final effort, Perry managed to avoid most of the attack. Rand couldn't believe her eyes. They had done everything right and timed their attacks perfectly. And yet, there was Lomi, still standing, but barely. Hades laughed, his trust in his owl Perry unshakable. At this point, Hades knew that all it would take to end the battle was Perry's signature wing bomb. Grabbing the terrified chicken by the beak with one wing, Perry raised the other in a menacing display of power. What happened next was nothing extraordinary or complex. Perry simply slapped Lomi across the face with all the force an owl could muster. It wasn't for show, it was pure, unadulterated force. The powerful slap decided the winner of the long and intense battle. The dark elf screamed as his precious Lomi was sent flying, unable to balance himself on his small wings. The fight was over, and Perry had emerged victorious. Rand could only watch helplessly as his loyal hen lay defeated,